Seductively, deadly, how royal favorites ruled kings and changed history. In history, power was almost never granted to women by birthright. But some did not wait for destiny to be kind. They took it for themselves. These women did more than just warm the beds of rulers. They influenced royal decrees, provoked wars, and ultimately decided what an entire nation would believe. Today, we break down 3 biographies, where seduction was merely a tool, and the true goal was a place in history. We will see just how far a woman can go when she starts with nothing but beauty, a sharp mind, and sheer persistence. In a world where men owned the power, the lands, and the laws, these women found their own way. While their male contemporaries spent years building careers and political ties, our heroines paved their road to the summit of power through royal bedchambers and philosophical halls. Contemporaries called them favorites, but history knows them as the architects of empires, the catalysts of revolutions, and the creators of national legends. Before you are 3 destinies, from poverty and brothels to ruling the kings themselves and the fates of nations. How exactly did they, without formal power, manage to immortalize their names in history? Chapter 1. Aspasia, the intellect that bowed Athens to its knees. Imagine Athens in the 5th century BC. This is not just a city. It is the superpower of the ancient world, the school of Hellas. It is a place where the clinking of gold coins from the Delian League's treasury mixes with the cries of merchants in fierce debates in the square. Athens at that time is simultaneously the Silicon Valley and the Hollywood of the ancient world. Democracy is being born. The Parthenon is being raised, and the Athenian fleet rules the Aegean Sea without rival. But in this ideal man's world, women had only one role: a quiet life behind the double bolts of the women's quarters, the gynoecium. They were forbidden from even stepping outside without an escort. And into this closed men's club enters a woman who, by all laws, should not have been there: Aspasia. She was not Athenian. She was born around 470 BC in Miletus, a wealthy port city on the coast of modern-day Turkey, one of the greatest intellectual centers of the Greek world. Her family belonged to the aristocracy, which gave her what almost all women of that time lacked: an education. Miletus was a city of scientists and freethinkers, and it was this spirit of intellectual freedom that Aspasia brought with her to Athens. Being a metic, a foreigner without civil rights, she could not legally marry a full citizen of Athens, but this status gave her a unique privilege. She was free from Athenian decencies. She chose the path of a hetaira. In Greece, this was not just elite companionship, but a whole social institution of partners. Hetairas were priestesses of goddesses, possessed inviolability, and were valued for their wit and intellect even more than their beauty. Aspasia quickly realized, in a world of men, knowledge is power. In 445 BC, she meets Pericles. To understand the scale, Pericles is effectively the father of the nation, the man under whom Athens reached the peak of its greatness. He was so influential that historians call this era the Golden Age of Pericles. Seeing Aspasia, this stern and calculating politician, used to controlling everything, lost his head. He divorced his legal wife and moved the hetera into his home. It was an unheard-of scandal. Conservatives whispered that every morning, leaving for the assembly, and every evening returning home, the great strategist publicly kissed her, a gesture of tenderness that in those times was considered almost provocative. In their house on the hill, an intellectual life simmered that defined the face of our civilization. Imagine the scene. In one corner sits Socrates, a strange man with a piercing gaze who made people doubt the very foundations of existence with his questions. Nearby is his student Platon, who would later immortalize these conversations in his dialogues. And over all this, not formally but in essence, dominates Aspasia. She didn't just pour wine, she was the brain of this circle. Socrates called her his tutor in rhetoric, and Plato claimed it was Aspasia who wrote Pericles' famous funeral oration. the manifesto of democracy that is still studied in every university in the world 2,500 years later. But such female power could not go unpunished. Pericles' enemies, not daring to attack him directly, struck at what he held most dear. In 432 BC, Aspasia was summoned to court. She was accused of Aspasia, impiety, and disrespect for the gods of Olympus. It was a charge that could literally cost her her life. By law, Aspasia faced exile or execution. The trial became a public spectacle followed by all of Athens. Pericles himself, the great orator before whom enemies trembled, spoke in her defense. Eyewitnesses recalled that he didn't just speak, he cried, begging the judges to spare his beloved. And the judges wavered. Aspasia was acquitted. It was her greatest victory over the system. Why are we so sure of her role today? The work of Madeleine Henry, a professor of classical philology and specialist in ancient gender history, is crucial here. In her work, Prisoner of History, Henry proves Aspasia is the only woman of that era who managed to break into the male canon of history, not as someone's shadow, but as an independent philosopher. Despite attempts to dismiss her as just a courtesan, the Greeks immortalized her memory in a paradoxical way. Her busts still stand in museums worldwide, alongside the greatest strategists and thinkers. She remains in history as living proof that intellect is the only social elevator capable of lifting a woman above laws and gods. Chapter 2. Madame du Barry, France's great spendthrift and the symbol of Versailles' doom. From sunny Athens, we move to the golden cage of pre-revolutionary France, to Versailles, where luxury reached its absolute peak and vices became part of state etiquette. Imagine Paris in the mid-18th century. It is a city of sharp contrasts, foul-smelling narrow streets where the poor fight for a crust of bread, and the dazzling Versailles, a massive palace complex that became the center of the universe for the European aristocracy. This is the era of the gallant age, where powder, silk, and beauty marks hid intrigues capable of toppling thrones. But by the 1760s, the French monarchy was already gasping for air. On the throne sits Louis XV, the beloved, who by age 50 had turned into a deeply tired, melancholic man, losing interest in everything except hunting and fleeting flings. And at this moment, she appears in Versailles, Jeanne Bécu. Her path to the throne was provocatively far from palace halls. She was born on August 19th, 1743, in the town of Vaucouleurs. Jeanne was the illegitimate daughter of a poor seamstress, a social death sentence for the 18th century. Fate prepared her for the life of a milliner in Parisian shops, but Jeanne's dazzling beauty opened other doors. She entered the school of Madame Gourdin, the most elite establishment in Paris, where girls were taught the art of seduction, manners, literature, and music. There, she was noticed by the adventurer Count Jean-Baptiste du Barry. He realized this girl was his golden ticket. He made her his mistress, and then, realizing the scale of her talent, effectively placed her under the king. To allow Jeanne to live officially in Versailles, they urgently created a new biography and married her off to the Count's younger brother, Guillaume. Thus, a simple shopgirl turned into the Countess du Barry. When she was officially presented to the court in 1769, it caused a political explosion. The powerful Duc de Choiseul, Prime Minister of France, hated the street girl, as some aristocrats contemptuously called her. He and his sister waged a true war against her, but Jeanne, possessing a light disposition and a quick wit, made the king feel young again. The result was staggering. In 1770, the almighty Choiseul was dismissed. A courtesan in the king's boudoir reshaped the entire government of France in a single night. And now, the main factor that ultimately destroyed her, the money that literally burned down the French monarchy. Jeanne became the most expensive woman in French history. To understand the scale, 1 gold livre of that time is equivalent to about 15 to 20 US dollars today. The king gave her the Louveciennes estate, where astronomical sums were spent on renovations, the gardens, pavilions with mirrored halls, and rare marble finishes cost the treasury over 6 million livres. In modern money, that is the equivalent of an incredible $100 to $120 million. And this was at a time when an average Parisian worker earned less than 1 livre a day and could hardly afford a loaf of bread. But the true symbol of her extravagance was the legendary diamond necklace, ordered by court jewelers Baumer and Bassange. It consisted of 647 pure diamonds and was valued at 2 million livres, about $35 to $40 million today. The necklace was so expensive that after the king's death, no one could buy it, which later led to the most famous fraud of the century and finally destroyed the monarchy's reputation. Jean lived as if tomorrow would never come. Historian Robert Darnton, one of the greatest researchers of the French Enlightenment from Princeton, asserts, Du Barry was not an evil person, but she became the perfect symbol of corruption. Her diamonds cost the king his head. Popular hatred for the harlot bankrupting the country became the fuel for the coming revolution. On December 8, 1793, Jean's story ended on the Place de la Révolution. Unlike many aristocrats who met the guillotine with icy calm, Jeanne fought. She screamed, cried, and desperately begged the executioner Charles-Henri Sanson. "Just one more minute, Mr. Executioner, just one more minute." Her remained forever. She inspired artists, composers, and directors. Her portraits by François Hubert Drouet adorned the Louvre. She became the heroine of Cole Porter's operas and countless films played by stars, from Paula Negri to Amber Heard. She went down in history as the woman who turned Versailles into her personal catwalk, never noticing how the mechanism of the guillotine was already being prepared behind the gates to destroy that entire world. Chapter 3. Nell Gwyn, the brothel favorite, who won the crown and the people's love. Imagine London in the second half of the 17th century, a city just beginning to recover from the Great Fire and the devastating plague. The streets are narrow, dirty, and loud, soaked in the smell of the Thames and cheap ale. But this is also the era of the Restoration, the time of the Merry Monarch, Charles II. After years of grim Puritan prohibition, music, dancing, and theaters returned to England. It was here, by the light of oil lamps and the laughter of the crowd, that the legend was born of the woman English people still affectionately call our Nell. Eleanor Gwyn was born on February 2, 1650, in the slums of Covent Garden. Her childhood was almost hopeless. Her father died in a debtor's prison when Nell was still a child. Her mother ran a brothel, and by age 13, the future royal favorite was already pouring brandy for drunken sailors and adventurers. Her path to fame began at the Drury Lane Theatre, where she worked as an orange girl, selling exotic fruits to the audience. No Nell, ni prosta prodavale citrusy. She showered the public with such sharp jokes that people started coming to the theater for her, rather than the plays. Soon, the charismatic redhead was noticed and became London's leading comedic actress. In 1668, she caught the eye of Charles II himself. The king was famous for his weakness for women, but Nell was special. Unlike the haughty aristocratic beauties at court, she didn't even try to pretend to be a noble lady. She called the king her Charles and was the only one who could make him laugh during his deepest depressions. And now about influence and money. Unlike Madame du Barry, Nell spent almost nothing from the treasury on diamonds for herself. Her secret sauce was different. It was incredible popular loyalty. Once, when her carriage was surrounded by an angry mob who mistook her for another Catholic favorite, Nell leaned out the window and shouted with a laugh, "Pray, good people, be civil. I am the Protestant whore." The crowd, ready for violence a second ago, instantly turned their anger into cheers. But her greatest and most unexpected achievement was the Royal Hospital Chelsea, founded in 1682. Legend says it was Nell who, remembering her soldier father, convinced the king to grant land and funds for a veteran's home. Today, this majestic building is worth billions of pounds, and the organization still cares for British soldiers. Historian Peter Ackroyd writes of her, "Nell Gwyn was the first star of the people. She used her proximity to the throne not to rise above the crowd, but to protect it. On February 6, 1685, in the gilded bedroom of Whitehall Palace, a dying Charles II uttered words that forever entered British history. His last will, addressed to his brother and heir, James II, was a short, tender phrase, "Let not poor Nellie starve." This scene was preserved by Bishop Gilbert Burnell and confirmed by the diaries of John Evelyn. This final command was the ultimate recognition for the Orange Girl. In his last hours, the king thought not of the empire, but of the safety of the woman, who alone knew how to bring him true joy. James II honored his brother's request. He paid off her massive debts, which would exceed $1 million today, and provided her with a generous pension, allowing the people's favorite to live out her days in peace and honor. She died on November 14, 1687, at only 37 years old. Her funeral at St. Martin in the Fields gathered thousands. The poor, whom she had bailed out of debtors' prisons with her own money, mourned her almost as a saint. Nell Gwyn remains a symbol that even from the very bottom, one can maintain dignity, and having risen to the very top, never forget those left below. As British historian Gillian Perry notes in Spectacle of Women, 2011, Nell Gwyn was not just the king's mistress. She was the first woman brand in British history. She created an image of an accessible, witty, and merciful heroine that completely changed society's attitude toward actresses. Even more poignantly, the great historian Thomas Babington Macaulay wrote that while other favorites were greedy foreigners, Nell remained English to the core, whose blunt humor and open heart made the monarchy human. She became a living bridge between the throne and the slums. Today, her name in Britain is not a symbol of sin, but a synonym for daring, loyalty, and that rare nobility that cannot be bought with any title. Why did we remember these three destinies today? Centuries lie between ancient Athens, golden Versailles, and foggy London. The answer is simple. Aspasia, Madame du Barry, and Nell Gwyn are not just chronicles of seduction. They are, above all, chronicles of the will to live and the drive for influence. In a world where women were denied a voice, they learned to speak so loudly that their echo is heard to this day. They proved that power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes true power is a sharp mind, the ability to empathize, or the daring to be yourself against all odds. We see these same archetypes today in media empires, in political corridors, and on Forbes lists. The methods of breaking through have changed, but the key mechanism of success remains the same: the readiness to put everything on the line for your goal. Now, a question for you. Who do you think made the most incredible leap? The intellectual Aspasia, co-author of Western Democracy, the daring Du Barry, whose lifestyle toppled a monarchy, or the Orange Girl, Nell Gwyn, who went from the slums to the hearts of a nation and a king? Whose strategy is closest to modern times? Let us know in the comments. It will be interesting to see your take. And don't forget to subscribe, because history is full of stories that still demand a closer look.